The summer before I entered high school, my 3 best girlfriends did what only teenage girls can do. They completely turned on me. Now, I wasn't a particularly popular kid, but I had my 3 friends. And on top of that, when I got to high school, I was insecure already, but now I didn't have my friends as my support system. Also, at my high school, the cool kids all sat on the radiator along the windows in front of the school, and they'd watch every day as every single one of us came in, and they could check us out. I was incredibly terrified that these cool kids were completely picking me apart with their stares. So much so that for my 4 years of high school, I came in the side door. So I was experiencing a lot of things, but no one in my high school would have known this. Because I was a varsity athlete, I was an honors student, I sang in the choir, I was in plays, I did all the stuff you're supposed to do. But I kept how I was feeling deep inside. I had a lot of words that seemed to describe me. And the hardest one for me was that pressure to be perfect, because I knew inside I wasn't. And it got me thinking as I got older. I was thinking, gosh, what would it have been like if my childhood had been one where I grew up feeling happy and self-assured and supported? So here's what I want to tell my 15-year-old self. Be a badass. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking a badass is someone who drives a really loud motorcycle and they're more likely to get a tattoo than maybe a bachelor's degree. But that's not the kind of badass I want you to be. The kind of badass I want you to be looks like this. This kind of badass knows who they are inside. They know that they don't know everything, but they stand strong enough to take care of themselves. So how can you be a badass? Let me break it down for you. The first B in badass stands for setting boundaries. The next letter is for being decisive and knowing that you are deserving of love. The S is for becoming self-aware. And the second S is about practicing self-care. In other words, I don't want you to be a regular old badass. I want you to be an emotional badass. So how can you do that? How many of you, by a show of hands, know what I'm talking about when I talk about setting boundaries? Well, as you just heard me say, I wasn't the most emotionally stable kid. I had a lot of ups and I had a lot of downs. And I was smart, though. I was smart enough to know that I should ask for help. And I remember this one day that I was talking to my therapist, and he said, Susanne, you really need to work on setting stronger boundaries. And I looked at him, I don't know what a boundary is. And he said, okay, I want you to do some research for me. I want you to go out and I want you to research medieval kingdoms. And I looked at him, I'm like, you're a crackpot. Why would I need to do that? But he gave me an assignment, and I decided I'd try to give it a go. So here's what I found. A medieval kingdom is like a series of concentric circles, where every time you want to step closer to the king, you have to go through a guard and a gate. For each time that you go from the outermost parts of the kingdom all the way towards the center of the city, you need to go through a guard and a gate and make sure that you are a trustworthy person who can be counted on if you get in the presence of the king. And if you're lucky, you actually get invited up to the moat, where you get asked to cross the drawbridge, and then if you're even more lucky, you get in to meet the king. Boundaries, I learned, were these invisible barriers, kind of like the force fields in Star Trek, that allowed you to take your time in getting to know someone, because trust didn't happen instantaneously. It happened as people passed through a series of guardrails and gates. Of course, I didn't know any of this, and I got to the point in my life where I realized I was so boundaryless that I would let a person I'd known 20 minutes, I would treat them the same exact way that someone I'd known 20 years. I would treat them with loyalty and dedication and trust, and I would have expectations of them, because to me, that's how I wanted to be treated. And the problem was this: they treated me as if I was someone they've known for 20 minutes. As you can imagine, I was disappointed a lot. In fact, I was crushed. And so I began to realize that maybe this king was actually onto something. And so I decided to put me in the center of those concentric circles. And I decided that I was going to take and write the name of everyone I knew in my entire life, and I was going to place them in the appropriate distance from me to learn how I could start setting boundaries for myself. I had my closest friends in my inner circle, and people who were practical strangers way on the outside. And I was so proud of myself for doing this that I went running into my dad, and I said, look what I did. And he said, you know, Suze, this is incredible, but you're missing the most important thing of all. You're missing the circle around yourself. I had actually not realized that in setting boundaries that I was my own self, that my closest friends still didn't get 1,000% of me. So what does it mean to be a badass, and how can you be one? Whether at school or at work or in relationships, a badass knows how to set boundaries and allow closeness and trust to build over time. The next part of being a badass is about being decisive and knowing that you're deserving of love. It's something I did not know through most of my childhood. One of my personal gurus, Wayne Dyer, says that our lives are the sum total of all of the choices that we make as we go through it. Every day, each of us makes choices: what to wear, what to eat, what to say. But I want to know from all of you, how many of those choices do you make consciously? How many of those decisions do you do because it's something you want to do? I used to have a really bad temper, and I would explode all the time because I was so emotionally tightly wound, and I didn't know where I was, and I didn't know boundaries. So people were constantly inciting me to a place I didn't want to be. So I actually gave myself an assignment at one point. I was going to only be dramatic when drama was necessary. Now, what this did is, for this moment in time, this millisecond, it gave me this tiny amount of time to stop and look at a situation and decide, was I going to blow up like I normally do, or was I going to be calm and respond? This thing acted like a pressure relief valve for me, and I could all of a sudden realize that I didn't have to react to everything. I could be choiceful, and I could respond appropriately. It taught me also something really important, which was that I was choosing how I wanted to treat people. They didn't deserve my temper or my bad mood. But even more importantly, when I turned the whole situation around, I realized I was teaching myself how I wanted to be treated. That there were certain things that were okay and not okay. So what does it mean to be a badass, and how can you be one? In any situation, a badass knows how to decide what is okay and not okay. They can determine how she wants to be treated, and he knows that he's deserving of love. The next part of being an emotional badass is about becoming self-aware. There's a story that goes like this. There's a man who every single day at work complained about his tuna fish sandwiches. So one of his coworkers finally said to him, "If you don't like your tuna fish sandwiches, why don't you have your wife make something else for you?" And he said, "You don't understand. I make them myself." Self-awareness is about making the unconscious conscious. It's about understanding that the things that we do are things that we are in control of. And this is really a tough one to teach. So I'm going to ask you for a moment to just close your eyes. And as you're sitting there, I want you to get comfortable in your chair. And I'm going to ask you to keep your eyes closed until I tell you to open them. And we're going to do a little exercise together. So on a deep inhale and then an exhale, I want you to, with your eyes closed, take a look at what your feet feel like. In your mind's eye, with your eyes closed, I want you to feel your feet solidly on the ground. And then I want you to move up to your knees and up to your butt in the chair and your shoulders and your neck. Maybe you're a little stiff. And then maybe what's going on in your mind. Are you listening to me? Do you think this chick is full of whatever? Are you thinking, gosh, I wish I had access to my email right now? That part of you is your mind, and it's the thing that controls so much of what we do that most people are not even aware of. So I want you to take another deep inhale, and we're going to do an exhale, and when we do, I want you to keep your eyes closed, but I want you to leave that busy mind of yours in your body, in your chair, and I want you to visually take a huge step to the right of where you are. Without opening your eyes, I want you to look back on your own body, and I want you to notice those same feet on the floor. I want you to notice your knees and your butt in the seat and your shoulders. And as you go up your neck, you're looking into your mind's eye now from the outside instead of from the inside. And if you practice this long enough, and if you get used to doing this on a regular basis, you'll start to realize there's a difference between the busyness that's going on inside your head and the quiet and peace that is going outside with the true you. As you look back on your body without judgment, you can notice that your mind is busy, but you are at peace. You can open your eyes now. What I'm trying to point out here is that there is a thing called you. It is the beautiful core essence of who you are. It is the part of you that is not affected by society or pressure or the things that cause people to cross boundaries. It is you in your purest state. And that we, on top of that, layer our mind, which is constantly fighting the pressures that we are under and what society tells us we should be. And often our mind forces us to have certain moods because we don't know how to deal with all of these pressures, and we don't understand that we are actually just kind and peaceful people underneath it all. So Eckhart Tolle, the author of Power of Now, talks about, I am not my mind. And this couldn't be more true. But one more piece of it that's even more important, I think, is that I am not my mind or my mood. And my mind and my mood are not my actions. Because sometimes we're in such a mood or we're in such a heightened emotional state that we do things that we don't necessarily want to do. We behave in ways that we are not proud of afterwards. But wouldn't it be great if you could stop yourself from doing that before you did it? So what does it mean to be a badass, and how can you be one? In life's ups and downs, a badass is self-aware and understands that moods and behaviors aren't really who he is or how she wants to present herself to the world. The last and most essential piece of becoming an emotional badass is about practicing self-care. I always thought that self-care was about good nutrition and exercise and getting good rest and having time to chill out, all of which is true. But the part I never understood about self-care is what it meant to put your emotional safety, your emotional needs first. It doesn't mean you're selfish. It doesn't mean that you're self-centered, but it means that you're self-protective. I learned this lesson the hard way. I was dating this guy, and I thought he was the bee's knees. He was the greatest guy, and we had so much fun together. I was into him, he was into me. All seemed really good. And on paper, we were the perfect match. We had all kinds of common interests. We liked hanging out together, and everything seemed just on the path. Except for I realized after a while that he didn't understand that he was different from his moods and his behavior. So much so that after a while, I started realizing that his behavior was disrespectful of me, and that many of the things he did and said hurt. So what I had thought had been this great relationship, when I took a look at it, now that I understood how to set boundaries and make good decisions and be self-aware, what I realized is it was really good 90% of the time, but the 10% was so bad that it wasn't worth it. It's not that he had done anything wrong, it's that it wasn't right for me. This was a big discovery. And so I realized I had to end what I thought was a great relationship. This was my hardest lesson of all. My question to you is, which of these is yours? So what does it take to be a badass? BaDaSS set boundaries. They're decisive, and they live with conscious self-awareness. And they do what's necessary to practice self-care. Thank you.